Welcome to the National Foundation of Swallowing Disorder webinar series. We're thrilled that you've taken the time tonight, given your busy or maybe not as busy schedule, to join us. My name is Ed Stuher. I'm a head and neck cancer survivor, diagnosed in 2005, and then diagnosed further with severe dysphagia in 2007. I'm also the president of the National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders. 1,400 people worldwide registered for this webinar. And we have 2 poll questions for our audience to get us started. They are anonymous, and the first one is your location by continent. And I'd really like to thank Elizabeth Lipton. She is responsible for our entire dysphagia webinar series and is our foundation's executive director. So Elizabeth, thank you for all that you do for the foundation. Can you launch our first poll question? And we'll leave that up for a minute while I talk about the mission of the foundation. The mission is to improve the lives of all those with dysphagia in our lifetime. And we do that through 4 pillars. We do that through providing direct patient support. An example of that is referring tough cases to qualified medical teams worldwide. We offer educational opportunities, such as this webinar series. We raise swallowing disorder awareness, and we do that by visits to the National Institute of Health, or during June, National Dysphagia Awareness Month. And we fund and accelerate promising research. Elizabeth, can you show the results? So it's not surprising that North America has the greatest number of people joining us given the time zone, but there are also plenty of people from Australia, then Asia or Africa, South America, and then followed closely behind by Europe. Our second poll question is about the impact on dysphagia care due to the pandemic, either from a healthcare provider or patient perspective. Elizabeth, can you launch that question, please? While you answer the second poll question, I'd like to circle back to one of our 4 pillars, that of patient support. Due to COVID, all of our dozen-plus in-person local support group chapters have suspended meetings. To address the need of our community, we have launched 2 real-time virtual swallowing support groups. One for adults impacted by dysphagia, and one for parents and caregivers of children with feeding and swallowing disorders. Our next adult swallowing support group meeting takes place this Friday, November 20th. If you have a swallowing disorder or are a caregiver of someone with a swallowing disorder, we invite you to join us. It's open currently to those only in the U.S. Each group is facilitated by a licensed psychologist, one who also has severe dysphagia, in concert with a speech-language pathologist. A few brief housekeeping items. You will be muted during the webinar, and we encourage you to submit questions at any time by hitting the question mark on your screen. I believe there is no handout for this webinar, but we will be recording it and plan to post it on our website as soon as the editing process is finished. That typically takes a week or two. Next slide, please. As a nonprofit organization, we rely on the financial support of our partners, sponsors, and community members. This webinar has been made free of charge thanks to a generous, unrestricted educational grant provided by BRCA Diagnostics. This webinar has also been sponsored by Clear Dysphagia Aid Beverage and Food Distributor, and I'd like to thank them too for their generous support. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is late-breaking news for us as we learned additional details earlier today. The annual Meet the Master Symposium, hosted by the American Board of Swallowing and Swallowing Disorders, and also supported by an unrestricted educational grant from BRCA Diagnostics, has transformed to a virtual format. For $19, registrants can earn 8.5 hours of ASHA CEUs. The 7 sessions will discuss the latest information on managing patients with dysphagia during the pandemic. And I believe registration opened on Friday, and our post-webinar email will provide a link to more information about the Meet the Masters program. And last, but far from least, I'd like to thank you for your generous donations. It's important to our foundation to provide high-quality education to patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers for minimal or no cost. We deeply appreciate your contribution to our foundation. All funds raised from this webinar will go towards expanding our real-time virtual swallowing support group programs. It's an honor for me to introduce you to our volunteer keynote speaker, Dr. Gabi Constantinescu. Gabi is an assistant professor at the University of Alberta and the chief product officer for True Angels. True Angels manufactures Mobili-T, a mobile swallowing therapy device Gabi designed during her doctoral program. Gabi was also the March 2020 recipient of the National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders prestigious Dysphagia Research Society Donovan Innovation Award. And she competed against about 20 other people who submitted abstracts of the work that she did. So tremendous work and tremendous congratulations for Gabi for that award. So at this time, please give us a minute and we'll switch you over to our volunteer keynote speaker tonight.
All right, I think you can see my screen and I'm no longer muted, but if that's not the case, then do let me know. Good evening, it's a pleasure to be here virtually with you. I'd like to thank the National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders for their kind introduction, particularly to Elizabeth Lipton, the Executive Director, and Ed Steger, the President, for their kind invitation and support. And I'd also like to thank you, the attendees, for taking the time out of your day, especially during dinner time, to attend this talk. And of course, I'd like to thank my team who's out there watching. They're like my little family. A special shout out to my colleagues Dylan and Christina for helping me learn the technical aspects of surface electromyography, but also a big thank you to Dr. Jana Rieger and to Noor for their feedback on the more clinical aspects of this talk.
Hey, Gabby, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Of course.
Are you able to turn on your video camera?
Oh, is it not turned on?
Not yet.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
No
Sorry to
worries.
interrupt.
All right. Also, a huge shout out to everyone watching this from all over the world today. Well, today or at a later time. I saw the list of registrants and there's over 67 countries represented, so thank you. There's a little over 1,000 speech language pathologists in that list of registrants. 130 students, I believe, about 38 patients, 33 caregivers, and 70 other professionals. So that's quite astounding. So thank you for your interest and for your time, and welcome. And today I'm joining you from right over here in Alberta, Canada. Now, Alberta is a beautiful province. We have a little bit of everything here. We have mountains, we have deserts and river valleys, we have fossils, and this here is probably the most Canadian thing on here. It's us playing curling on a frozen lake using Kool-Aid and frozen milk jugs. So there you have it. Now, I understand that you, the audience, may have different levels of background knowledge and experience that you're bringing with you today. So if this is too much too fast, I'm told that the talk will be recorded and available later. But don't worry too much, because my goal for this presentation for you today is that you all feel confident enough to use surface electromyography tomorrow if you had to. And for those of you who have been at this for a while, I do hope that you take something away from this presentation and still learn something new. Now, I happily accepted this talk today because SEMG biofeedback, I believe, really has the potential to revolutionize your therapy, engage your patients in their own treatment, but also make for better conversations between patients and caregivers and clinicians regarding goals and regarding expectations. Now, like Ed said so kindly, I do come from a clinical and academic background. I've been a clinician for about 10 years, specializing in dysphagia management with patients with head and neck cancer. I have completed a PhD a couple of years ago, and now I'm an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Alberta. But 100% of my time right now is spent being a CPO for TrueAngle, the company that developed the miniaturized SEMG system for take home. It's a mobile health system called Mobili-T. Now, this talk won't be on mobility, so if you have any questions on that or want more information, please contact me directly or visit our site. Now imagine that most people on this call will have seen an X-ray of a typical swallow. I'd like to use this for all of us to calibrate on what a typical swallow looks like. Now this isn't a healthy swallow, by the way, it's a preoperative swallow of a head and neck cancer patient, but it's as close as I'll ever come to seeing a healthy swallow. So for those of you who are brand new to this, if you're a student just starting out, this is an X-ray movie typically used in our profession. We give patients different volumes and consistencies of food mixed with contrast, so it looks black. I'll play this video again. Sometimes it's a little choppy. And then we look as clinicians to see where the food is going. But more importantly, we look at what the structures are doing and where we can intervene. Now, when it was playing this video of a healthy swallow, you probably noticed that it was timely, it was efficient, and it was coordinated and safe. On the flip side, an atypical swallow can exist because of an impairment in many or all of those aspects. Now, Dr. Joanne Robbins and colleagues in an article of theirs in 2008 defined dysphagia as, and I quote, a disordered swallowing associated with central peripheral sensory motor deficits that are associated with stroke, neurodegenerative disease, tumors of the head and neck, infection, or trauma. And I really like this definition because I find it is all-encompassing. Now, some staggering stats that most of you will be familiar with is that in the United States alone, each year, 1 in 25 adults will experience dysphagia. And that's an older stat, it's from 2014. We also hear a lot the stats that 22% in adults over 50 will experience dysphagia. And when we get down to the actual etiologies that are commonly associated with dysphagia, the stats are even higher, of course. With stroke, anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of patients with stroke will have dysphagia. Parkinson's, 35 to 82, and about half the patients with head and neck cancer will experience dysphagia. Now, the thing about dysphagia is that aside from the impacts on health and nutrition, for the most part, in my experience, it's been an invisible disorder. Not a lot of people know what it is. It's unfamiliar. For me, at least until I started studying it, I didn't even know that it existed. And yet it is extremely devastating and isolating. Now, there are a number of ways that we as clinicians can assist someone with dysphagia, but where SEMG biofeedback comes in and truly shines is when we're talking about rehabilitation exercises. So that's what I'll be focusing on today. Now, I wanted to start my talk with this article. It's again by Joanne Robbins and colleagues from 2008. And I want to start with it because to simply say that exercise on its own is not enough. I remember when I was running one of my doctoral research studies, interviewing patients on what they thought exercises were. I got a wide variety of answers. I got everything from, well, exercise is that thing I do for half an hour a day that's rigorous and intensive and feels like a workout, all the way to, well, I swallow every day, so hence I exercise every day. But in this article, the authors, what they end up doing is they translate 10 principles of neuroplasticity into our world of dysphagia. And how nice is it that they've already done that work for us? Their work is important and extremely relevant to dysphagia management because clinical evidence remains very limited for us for the type, the timing, and the dose of therapy required to really make lasting functional changes. Now, I'm going to highlight 5 of those 10 principles from the article. The first one is use it or lose it. And you probably come across this saying in different contexts. But here, what it means essentially is that the swallowing mechanism has to be active so that the function does not degrade. And this is particularly true for the patients I see with head and neck cancer. But it's not just about the exercise for sake of exercise. The second principle, use it and improve it, speaks to using exercises that involve skill training. So the authors liken this to target practice. So that's a perfect example. If you think of darts, throwing darts at a target, it's not just about throwing darts up, down, and all around and hoping that some of them will hit the target. It's also about deliberate practice. So really focusing on what you're doing during that exercise. The third and fourth principles that I want to highlight are that repetition and intensity matter. But here the authors raise an excellent point where they say that we need to shift our focus on what are the optimal doses for each type of therapy, rather than tailor our programs, and I used to do this too, based on our availability and our resources and the limits put on us by third-party pay. Now, it just so happens that Brittany Kirkeller, who I think is a rising star in our field, she just published a scoping review on dose in exercise and dysphagia. And I encourage you to read it, but I also challenge you to ask yourselves, is the dose prescribed the same as the dose taken? And I do believe that biofeedback can help us understand what the dose taken is. And in the last principle of neuroplasticity that I want to highlight from this article is that salience matters. And here we're talking about the fact that neuroplasticity is best induced when the movement is purposeful and it's related to the behavior that we're actually trying to improve. So for instance, if I'm trying to get better at throwing darts, then I should be throwing darts to get better at that. And certainly there are other things that I can do to improve how I throw my darts, but ultimately I do need to throw darts to get better at that activity. So I wanted to start with these principles of neuroplasticity because I feel like surface electromyography biofeedback can play a role to highlight these principles within dysphagia exercise. Now, I often get asked what's the evidence behind surface electromyography biofeedback, and to that I say a fair bit. But I also remind everyone that surface electromyography biofeedback is an adjuvant to swallowing therapy. So a way to enhance learning and to enhance practice. So therefore, it is only as good as the exercises in the treatment program that you as clinicians prescribe. So for instance, if I have a patient, and I'll relate it to my own patient population that I'm familiar with, if I have a patient with a maxillary fistula, and I'm asking them to do the effortful swallow for whatever reason, they could be doing the effortful swallow with biofeedback for days and days and days and get better at the effortful swallow. but their swallow won't actually improve because the fistula is still there. I know that's an obvious example, but what I'm trying to say is that ultimately it is the treatment programs that you design and that you create that are now being enhanced so that patients can take the most out of them that SEMG is really helping out with. Now, conveniently enough, there are 2 systematic reviews on the topic that were published just last year. One is this top one here. It's specific to EMG, so that's the one that I recommend you read out of the 2 if you can't read both of them. And the second one is on biofeedback in general. So they combine all sorts of biofeedback technologies out there, not just EMG. But the top one is just on EMG, and it included 6 studies ultimately in the review. And just so you have an idea of who the players are, there were 3 articles from the United States, 1 from the Netherlands, 1 from China, and 1 from Australia. Now, SEMG biofeedback has been around for many decades, in fact, since 1966. And it has been used by our colleagues in physiotherapy for almost as long. So hence, to me, it's an established technology. It's been around for a while. Now, we've only recently adopted it in our field, and I imagine that the reason for this is because our field is still quite young. The first use of SEMG with dysphagia that I came across in my doctoral work is from 1976. And it was actually for psychogenic dysphagia, and it was used to help the patient relax the muscles rather than elicit maximum effort, which is what we do today. But it wasn't until groups like Huckabee and Crary and Carnaby groups started running extensive, well-run studies with the technology that SEMG started to become more popular amongst us clinicians. And these are in chronological order, by the way. So here you have a few more studies. Now, this is not an extensive list of all SEMG studies on swallowing out there for sure. I included these because they included some type of therapy as well. If you looked up surface electromyography and swallowing dysphagia, you'd find a whole lot more studies, but these ones involve some type of therapy that was provided to patients. Now, most of these programs in these studies included the effortful exercise and the Mendelssohn maneuver exercise. Now, I'm going to go back to that study that I mentioned earlier, Robbins in 2008. They suggested that tasks that target strength as well as skill, like the Mendelssohn maneuver, had a better chance at yielding improvements in both the periphery and the cortical and the subcortical levels. So hence, pairing these 2 exercises with SEMG is where people seem to go when they're using biofeedback. Now, for those of you out there who have never used or seen SEMG, this is what it typically looks like. This is the equipment that I used to use in clinic when I started out. It's a K-Pentax machine with the monitor here, the computer. This is where I'm going to draw your attention. This is the Swallowing Signals Lab data acquisition box. And what's happening is we have some sensors, some electrodes that are on this sticky pad that sticks under the chin. And that's connected with alligator clips and wires, and those connect to this data acquisition box. And then on the screen, as a clinician and as a patient, you get to see a signal or biofeedback line, essentially, that goes up when you swallow, presumably associated with muscle contraction, and then goes down flat lines when you're relaxed. So presumably you have finished swallowing and your muscles are relaxed. The sensors on that particular system, the K-Pentax, look like this on a person. So you have a sticky pad here. This paper is the backing, the paper backing. You peel that off. And on the other side that you can't see, that's the side that sticks to the patient. And you have 3 electrodes or 3 sensors. On the other side, you have these button snaps. That's what you connect the alligator clips to. You can see them better on here on my colleague James. So here you have 3 wires. 1 is black and 2 are white. Now, what you're doing when if you have one of these in your lab, what you're doing is you're essentially telling the system which one of these electrodes is a reference or a ground, and which one are your active electrodes. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But what I wanted to point out is if you hooked up the black wire or the black alligator clip to this electrode here, you're saying this electrode is now my reference. This is not on a muscle, it's just collecting activity from the environment that will then be subtracted from the active signal that I'm looking at. When you hook up the 2 white wires and alligator clips to these other electrodes, you're saying these electrodes I'm going to put on a muscle. So whatever activity you're collecting from these 2 electrodes, that's what I'm interested in. So you can put these little alligator clips on here as you wish, but then when you place them on the patient or the individual using the system, that's where you have to pay attention that the black one actually goes on a bony prominence, for instance. Now, even so, with all the wires and all of that, this is the best system that I had at the time and the best that most of us actually have. We're very lucky to have biofeedback in our clinic. And what you see on the screen is you see a line go up in real time as you swallow or as you conduct your swallowing exercises. And clinicians such as myself use this to teach conceptually complex exercises like the Mendelssohn swallow. That one's a tricky one. So this is what the biofeedback would look like for that. I essentially call it the plank of the swallow exercises because it is a sustained contraction. So as you swallow and hold, so contract your muscles, hold for 2 to 5 seconds, and relax. So that's what you're seeing here. And try again, swallow and hold, and relax, and so on and so forth. Now for effortful swallows, like you see up on this top screen, what I can do is set targets. So I can ask patients to swallow harder, to try and beat their past peak. So I can set amplitude targets, and for the Mendelssohn, I can also set time targets or duration targets. Now, typically clinicians and researchers, when we look at EMG biofeedback, we look at it in what's called the time domain, and that's just a fancy way of saying that on the x-axis we have time, and on the y-axis we have amplitude. But on the x-axis, this is 0 time. Let's say this is 1 second, 2 seconds, etc. There are other ways that we can look at EMG, but I won't go over those in this talk. And when clinicians and researchers do look at this time domain, some of the variables that they're interested in, as I said, is when is the muscle onset happening, when is the muscle offset happening, what's the duration of that quote-unquote swallow or biofeedback contraction, and what is the mean amplitude that I'm seeing. So these are some typical variables that are looked at. Now, when I started my PhD, one of my mentors who was outside of my dysphagia field asked me a very simple question. He said, okay, great, so you have this line that goes up and down, but what does it actually mean? What are you actually looking at? And like most simple questions, it wasn't all that simple to answer, but it did motivate me to read and ask questions of my engineer colleagues to help me understand what I was actually looking at. So let's step it back a bit rather. What is biofeedback? So biofeedback, I like this definition, is the use of technology to increase awareness of physiological processes that we can't typically see, so swallowing, perfect example, by providing real-time, precise representations of the activity. And you can have visual biofeedback, you can have tactile, and you can have auditory biofeedback. But visual is what we'll be talking about today and what we've been talking about up until now. My two favorite strengths of biofeedback, I'm sure there are many, but these are my favorite, is one that it recognizes and rewards small changes that will eventually lead to meaningful functional improvements. And I'll come back to that in a bit. And the other thing is that it increases self-efficacy, or my thinking about how confident I am that I'm able to do a certain task in patients by drawing attention to these small signs of progress. So what this means to me is that I can use biofeedback to create a sense of flow, of focus for patients during therapy. And I say this because most of my patients, if not all of them, will come to me with the goal of going from puree diets or feeding tubes to eating steak, again, in a very busy restaurant full of distractions. And I fully understand it. This would be my goal as well. However, if I were to apply that to me, it would be as if my life right now is about 10 hours a day in front of the computer. It would be akin to me wanting to run a marathon in the next 2 months. Now, I have friends who can do that. I certainly can't do that. And then thinking that seeing a trainer, for instance, once or twice a week will help me to get there. And feeling like if I am doing that and not getting there, that might be a very defeating and a very disappointing thing to go through. But what if instead I focused my attention on different goals? So goals like going from lifting a 5-pound bell bar to a 10-pound. Goals like tracking consistency of exercise. Goals like sticking to a program. Goals like today I could do more exercises than last week, or the same number that I was able to do last week, but maybe it's easier for me this time around. Then my sense of self-efficacy, if you will, my engagement with the program and my likelihood to stick with the program long-term may go up. So SEMG is a type of biofeedback technology. It stands for surface electromyography, or SEMG for short. So the S stands for surface because it sticks to the surface of the skin. And I say that because there's another type of EMG out there called needle electromyography that's a lot more invasive. You actually put in needles inside the muscle and collect EMG directly from the muscle fibers. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about stickers that stick on the surface of your skin, so very non-invasive, easy to use. Surface electromyography, it detects electricity, myo from your muscles, graphy, and makes a graph out of it. So you're thinking at this point, great, another acronym. There are many acronyms in the field of dysphagia I've discovered. These are just some options that I found. I just wanted to make a point. And some of these are technologies, some of these are products, some of these are approaches to therapy. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of us as clinicians don't know the difference entirely between all of these acronyms. And I really think we're doing a disservice to our patients by burdening them with all of these acronyms, because how can they really know what the options are available to them when really there's just there's a lot to keep track of. So one way to categorize some of these acronyms is to think of them as either passive or active. So passive technologies or passive biofeedback like SEMG, they simply monitor what you are doing. Active stimulation, that refers to an active stimulations of the muscles that are involved. So a little bit different. And this distinction is important because with passive sensors like SEMG and the other ones that you're used to, they're quite simple to use. You can use them at home and require very minimal training. Whereas the active stimulation technologies, they do require, and rightly so, the presence of a trained and in many cases certified clinician, as well as sometimes specialized and expensive equipment. Now, if you're new to all of this, I just want you to remember one important thing, and that is that SEMG is not eSTIM. And if you know this already, you might be giggling, but this is a true point of confusion, so much so that it prompted this article by Katrina Steele in 2004, where she was trying to address this point of confusion with clinicians. Now, this talk is on SEMG, as you know, but if you want to learn more about the other technologies that I had up there are many very readable resources and recorded webinars on Dysphagia Cafe and NFOSD's website. So right now, you're probably thinking, okay, Gabi, but you still haven't told us what this line means. You're right. So I want to focus the rest of my talk to make this beautiful and simple technology accessible to you, whether you're a clinician or a patient. And again, my goal for you is to let you walk away feeling like this is something you can do. So muscle contraction begins when the nervous system generates a signal. Now, this signal is referred to as an action potential, typically, and it travels through a type of cell called a nerve cell that is called actually a motor neuron. And this action potential is actually an electrochemical event. And when it gets to, let's say, these little ends of the motor neuron connect to this muscle fiber cells, and that space, if imagine if they were connected, is called the neuromuscular junction. And that's where the motor neuron here reaches a muscle cell like this one. Now, if I had a motor neuron and all these muscle fibers that it was connected to, I would be calling that a motor unit. So if you can see my mouse, I'm not too sure. Oh, skipped ahead. There we go. That'll teach me to play with my mouse. Okay, so that is a motor unit. So when the signal reaches this junction, the space between the neuron and the muscle fiber, it sends it a chemical message. And you may have heard of this neurotransmitter, it's called acetylcholine, but essentially acetylcholine binds to these muscle fibers and it starts this process of shortening the muscle to contract and then lengthening it to relax. Now, if we were to take a needle EMG, the more invasive type of EMG that I told you about, it's not what we're talking about, but if I were to take one and look at each individual muscle fiber, we would see a little waveform that's specific to that muscle fiber. It's almost like the fingerprint of that muscle fiber. So that tracing is dictated by the inherent properties of that little muscle fiber, that motor unit, and where your needle actually sits. But we have many different muscle fibers, and hence many different types of tracings like this, which when superimposed, you'd get a recording you can think of it as a summation of all those tracings. And that is called a motor unit action potential. It's the sum of all those potentials and all those tracings from all the little muscle fibers in that motor unit. Now, this is a direct quote from John Hopkins' website, and I quote, "SEMG measures the electrical activity of muscles during rest, slight contraction, and forceful contraction." So as the muscles contract more forcefully, more and more muscle fibers are activated, producing more action potentials. So the activity detected by the electrodes is of all the summation of these action potentials from many, many muscle fibers. So coming back to what am I actually looking at here? Well, very simply put, this amplitude can mean many different things. It can mean that you have maybe an increased number of muscle fibers in a motor unit. Maybe you have a more synchronized firing of these muscle fibers. Maybe there's an increased diameter or what's called hypertrophy of the muscle fibers, and this is what we're actually after when we're looking at muscle strengthening. But it can also mean that the sensor is closer to the actual motor unit or the muscle. What do I mean by that? Well, remember that our sensors are not needles. They're actually surface sensors. So they collect all this information about muscles at the surface of the skin. Now, this means that the signal has to travel through adipose tissue, has to travel through skin before it reaches my sensor. So the more tissue there is for it to travel through, the more dampened that signal will be. And also remember that we have lots of muscles in the submental area. And I apologize, what I mean by the submental area is under the chin. I know I've said it a lot, and there are probably some people out there scratching their heads what that is. Submental area under the chin. The signal you're collecting won't be muscle specific because of that. You'll be looking at contributions from a muscle called platysma, from the anterior belly of the digastric, maybe some myelo and geniohyoid contributions as well. So if you think of the guitar as a metaphor full of this, if you pluck the string of a guitar, it's almost like looking at a single muscle fiber with its own characteristic signal. Plucking all the strings would be akin to a motor unit action potential. And now if you take the activity of many guitars, different size guitars, little big ones, and strum them all together and then also muffle them through a blanket, which would be like your skin, that's what we're collecting at the surface of the skin. So you can imagine then that different types of chins and skins will give us different types of signals. And I've been getting some very excellent questions from clinicians out there on how skin and adipose tissue and fibrosed tissue from head and neck cancer patients may influence EMG signal. Now, I've been able to collect some excellent signal from almost everybody, probably not from gentlemen's like this one with the beard, but so far I've been able to make EMG work with almost everybody. Now, if you're still with me by now, you're probably thinking, okay, but those hairy tracings you've shown us that look like raw signal don't quite resemble what I see on the screen. They don't look like that nice envelope line that goes up and down when someone swallows. And you're right, that's because the signal is processed a bit to make it easier for you to interpret quickly. So for the engineers out there, I know you're probably cringing. This is not, I know this is not EMG signal, it's just audio signal, but bear with me. I'm trying to disprove a point here. So let's say the raw signal looks something like this. And let's look at this horizontal line. We'll call it the 0 line. What happens to get the signal that you as a clinician see is that all of this activity below the 0 line is taken away, flipped over, and added to the activity above the line. So take it away, flip it, add it, and that's what you see almost. That's called rectifying the signal. Now, another thing that the computer does is it takes all these little hairy spikes and it averages them over time. And there's different ways to average, don't worry about that. But essentially what that means is it smooths it out so you get a nice signal like this and not something that's wacky and spiky like what you see above. Now, there are other signal processing steps that happen. I won't get into those, but just know that those also happen to ensure that what you see is very representative of muscle activity. Now, one important concept here to pay attention to is called signal and noise. Sometimes it's referred to as signal to noise ratio. So if I lost you, this is a good time to tune back in. Signal is the tracing that you're actually interested in. I know it's all signal, but when we're talking about it in terms of signal to noise ratio, signal is the tracing that you are actually interested in. What does the muscle do? Noise is the background noise. So that's, you don't want noise. You want as little noise as possible. And if there is noise, you want it subtracted from your signal. So to get optimal biofeedback, you want strong signal, low noise. Now, in an article by Riaz, they categorized noise affecting SEMG specifically into 4 different categories. So one was coming from the inherent noise of the electronics. One was coming from the ambient noise from electromagnetic radiation. One type of noise is coming from the motion artifact, where the electrode interfaces with the wires and maybe with the skin. And the other type was from the inherent instability of the signal. So what can you do about all this? Well, to address the inherent noise from the electronics equipment, you would have to use to ensure that you're using the adequate electrode size and inter-electrode distance for whatever it is you're interested in. So this diameter of the electrode, that really matters. And the distance between the electrodes, that also really matters. Now, if you're using a system that's built specifically for dysphagia muscles or submental muscles under the chin, then you don't really have to worry about this too much. The company selling you the system has already done all the background research and work behind that, so you don't need to worry. The other thing that you can use to address the ambient noise from all around us is to properly place the ground or the reference electrode, and we'll get into that in a minute. And to address the motion artifact is to, if you can, work with a wireless system, and for a gentleman, make sure that you're clean shaven, and you know, the oil, that the underside of the chin is free of oils and makeup and things. So placement is important, yes. And this is me trying to add more Canadian flair to this with the little A and her flannel shirt. Anyway, so the reference electrode should be placed on a fixed surface or a bony prominence, such as the mandible. That's where I typically place it, while the other 2 electrodes should be parallel to the muscle fibers of the muscle of interest. That is what's going to result in the strongest signals or optimal signal to noise. So what is an immovable or a bony prominence that we can put this reference electrode on? Well, you can put it, like I said, on the mandible, but you can also put it on the forehead, on the clavicle. Some people put it on the elbow, really any bony prominence that doesn't move, essentially. So I want to review a couple of articles that have mentioned the placement of their sensors. Not all of them do, so when I see it, I get really giddy, because it means that the authors have found it important enough, and know it's important enough to mention. And I'm sharing these with you today because I want you to see that there's variability out there in what people are placing the reference or the electrodes on, the SEMG electrodes on. And that could simply be because of the research questions that they're asking and the muscles that they're interested in. So this first article, and I'll show you where it's coming from after we look at it. They mentioned that they placed their active electrodes on the right side of the mandible. So the active electrodes are here, right side of the mandible, or the midline, pardon me, and their reference electrodes they placed, in this case, on the forehead. So as we're going through this, I want you to think to yourselves, is that good signal to noise ratio? And maybe what would be the muscle that these authors were interested in? This next one, they placed their active electrodes between the hyoid bone and the superior border of the thyroid. And the reference electrode was placed on the thyroid notch. And the two active electrodes were on the left and right side of the ground, were the reference. And let's do one more. This last one, the authors placed the active electrodes lateral to the midline again, and they placed the reference point on off to the side. Now, what we do on our team is we like to focus on our attention on this muscle right here, the digastric, anterior belly of the digastric, pardon me. So we place typically, because we work with sensors that are attached to either a sticker or to a device. I mean, you could cut it out if you're using a sticker, but why would you? So what we do is we place the reference electrode on the mandible. That's the bony prominence that we use. And then we rotate the sticker or the device slightly so that the two active electrodes form, the line that they form goes parallel to the muscle fibers of the anterior belly of the digastric. Now, naturally, we're probably getting some contribution in the signal from the mylohyoid and the geniohyoid, the platysma. But this muscle is very close to the skin, so that's my thinking that it has the biggest contribution to the signal out of those muscles. And if you wanted to do more exercises like the one that we just did, I included a couple more articles here. You can draw the active electrodes and the reference on your own and think about whether the signal to noise ratio is good and potentially what muscle may the researchers have been interested in based on their placement. Also, if you're really serious about all this and want to get into it and really truly understand it, I highly recommend this article. It's a tutorial by Dr. Kara Stepp, and I feel like she does a wonderful job bridging the gap between the engineer speak and the clinician speak. And while it is a bit of a lengthy read, it's really well organized. It has examples of optimal placements like I've shown you. And if you're a busy clinician, like I know you are, you can even cut the reading in half because let's say if you're just focusing on swallowing, you can skim over the speech and just focus on the swallow part. But anyway, highly recommend it. So I want to next focus on some tips and tricks for using SEMG at home and in the clinic. So SEMG, like I've said, is not complex. It's easy for us to use, but placement is an important step. So good placement equals good signal, and we want good signal because that means that the feedback you're getting is relevant and good. So how do you get good signal? This is a review of what we've been talking about so far. So you select the muscle that you're interested in. You might want one that's close to the skin surface, so probably not the posterior pharyngeal walls. You want one that's activated by the exercise you're doing if you're going to use SEMG as an adjuvant to exercise therapy. And you want one that is important to swallowing, obviously. Then you want to make sure if you're using just any old EMG system out there that's not specific to dysphagia and swallowing exercises, to ensure that the electrodes are right in size and that they have the right spacing between them. And CENIUM has guidelines on what these should be based on the muscle size that you're looking for. But if you're just taking a device that's specific to dysphagia management and swallowing exercises, someone else has done the thinking for you, so that's good. You don't have to worry about these. That's why they're in brackets. And how do the fibers of the muscles run? I remember during my PhD, I spent a couple of evenings looking at articles on cadavers, just looking at how these fibers were running for the anterior belly of the digastric. And it's not always as clean cut as our anatomy textbooks make it out to be. Then you want to place the active electrodes parallel to those muscle fibers for the best quality signal, and then to place the reference on a bony prominence, like I said. I mentioned that we all have different chins, and if you've had surgery and radiation to that part of the anatomy, then it's going to be even more different still. So I have, like I said, been able to get good SEMG signals successfully for most people that I've used it with. I've had one person refuse to shave his beard, but that was understandable. He had a beard that went down to his belly, and it was actually hiding quite a bit of scars from his head and neck cancer surgery. So I didn't make him shave his beard. But I've had people with saggier skin, and I've had people with very stiff, fibrosed skin from radiation, and we've still been able to use biofeedback with everyone. Where I found biofeedback to be a bit trickier has been with people who had a lot of associated swallow activities, so really struggling to initiate a swallow. And that's because you're seeing that EMG signal all throughout. So even as they're doing things like this to collect saliva and prepare to swallow. So for those patients, I just spend a little bit more time up front educating and trying to get them to do all those movements before we start capturing the signal, and then ensuring that what we're looking at is their actual swallows and not some other associated movements that they may have done. Here's what I used to set up on my tray when I was using the K-Pentax system. So I had a glass of water if the patient could handle water. I used to pack a couple of these stickers with sensors in case one of them didn't work for whatever reason. Gauze pads and alcohol pads. So I used the alcohol pads to clean under the chin to prep the skin and make sure that it was nice and clean so the stickers could stick well. And then I used to use Spectrogel to put a little dab on the sensors here. You don't want too much. If you put on too much, what's going to happen when you stick the sensors under the chin, the electrode gel blobs are going to combine, and now essentially it'll just seem like you have one giant electrode instead of 3 separate ones, if that makes any sense. So just a tiny little dab of that, but now electrode technology is getting a bit more advanced, and there's some electrodes like the ones used in Mobili-T where you don't need the Spectrogel. And the alligator clips, of course, for the K-Pentax. All right, just a little bit left here of the talk. So Katrina Steele had a nice article a while back on SEMG and intersession comparison. So this is essentially what this boils down to. If I have a patient, let's say his name is John, and he comes in on November 5th, and I record this nice tracing of his swallows, and then he comes back on November 10th, so 5 days later, assuming that I'm now looking at the same scale and I record these tracings, I might think, oh, well, wow, he's doing so much better. The exercises are working. Look at that giant peak, amazing. Then he comes back on November 5th and I take this tracing, again, assuming that the y-axis is the same for everybody. So I might think, oh, well, now it's so tiny, it's smaller than what it was on November 5th. What's going on? He might be regressing. I'm scratching my head. No, what's going on here is that we're comparing apples to oranges. Each time you take the sensors off and put them back on, you have placed them in slightly a different spot. So that may change the way that the signal is being collected and the way that it looks. Not only that, but maybe you're running your session in a different room, and so the noise in that room, the noise signal that we were talking about earlier might be different in that particular room, or the patient's level of activity might be different, and so they might actually be doing different that day. So what's important to do here, which both Katrina Steele and Kara Stepp mention in their articles, is to either normalize or calibrate the signal, if you will. So what that means is you might ask your patient, or if you're the patient, you might do this. Just sit nice and still, take a baseline measure of you doing absolutely nothing, no muscle contraction, just looking at what the noise floor in the room is for that particular day, for that particular sensor placement for you. Then what you want to do is collect either the strongest swallows that you can do or just your regular swallows, anything that helps you calibrate or normalize the signal for us. So let's say you do 5 of those. And then now you're going to average them, and you're going to use that number now as a reference for everything you're doing in that session. So now everything you're doing in that session is a percentage of that normalized or that calibration period, if you will. So if you think of these dotted lines of a percentage, now when I'm looking at my different sessions, I can see that, well, my patient wasn't quite reaching that target, but then the second time they came in, they kind of were, they were getting there. And then the third time they came in, they really nailed it. So they're just going above and beyond that session reference. And the reason I can make this intersession comparison is because I've calibrated. All right, so one important lesson that I've learned early on from a kind reviewer is that SEMG is just an adjuvant to therapy. It's associated with kinematics of the swallow, but it's not a hard and fast rule that that is what is actually happening. You still need a modified barium swallow exam to see what is actually happening. And we know from the literature, from some of the work that Wheeler-Hegland et al. Have done, is that it is sensitive to the type of swallowing task that's performed. Hence, it's a good adjuvant to therapy. One more cool thoughts that I wanna leave you with is that, again, it's non-invasive, it's easy to apply, requires minimal training. It's really good for monitoring what your muscles under the chin are doing as you exercise. It brings awareness of that muscle control. And like I said, it's a good adjuvant to what we do with our patients during swallowing exercise. Again, don't forget, you can't look at specific muscles because it is at the surface of the skin, and you can't really compare session to session or person to person without calibrating or normalizing. Last but not least, things I document in clinic. I document where I place the SEMG sensors, of course. I document what I use to calibrate. So when I either normalize or calibrate, whatever you want to call it, I write down what I used. So for instance, we know that SEMG signal from a saliva swallow is not as strong as SEMG signal from a pudding swallow. So if I'm calibrating on, let's say I'm using pudding for whatever reason to calibrate and get the session reference and targets, and now during session I'm using saliva swallows, well, it's going to be really hard to hit those targets. On the flip side, if I'm calibrating using saliva swallows and then using pudding during my exercise, it's going to seem really easy to achieve those targets. So again, just make sure you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I write down, just like everything else we do in clinic, what percentage of the targets were achieved, any cueing that I've provided, so swallow hard or anything like that, that may have helped the patient. Any comments or observations, so if I'm constantly cueing to relax their shoulders or neck muscles, not to cringe, or any other associated movements that we don't want during swallows, like the Curry and Carnaby group have mentioned during their MDTP training, you don't want these like forced twitching during, when you go to a restaurant, that's not how you swallow, so you don't want that during exercise either. I note those, and any future steps or goals that I might have. Troubleshooting, we've gone over this. If the signal is not responsive, just make sure that the connections are all good. Check that the electrode is in touch with the skin. Sometimes the stickers are not that good, or for whatever reason it's not working. And sometimes with the K-Pentax, I've just removed the electrode pad and replaced it all together and started over. If your signal is noisy, there might be some movement in the wire. If you just touch those wires, you'll notice that there's a deflection in the signal. What I used to do is I just clipped them out of the way. So if the patient was moving their arms, you weren't introducing noise into the signal. And then if you have, for whatever reason, lots of equipment in the room, just move to an office or a conference room that doesn't have all of that. Some parting thoughts here. I get easily excited by this stuff, so I'm quite passionate about things that I learn and making what I've learned accessible to others. So hopefully I've done that for you today. I love to hear questions. I love to hear what clinicians and patients and caregivers want, what the next dreams and hopes and wants from our profession are. So please contact me with any of those things. I love finding unconventional partners. As I was mentioning to Ed earlier, I could not see myself ever working without engineers and designers. I feel like they've really helped me look at problems that I had with a different perspective, think outside the box. Yeah, be excited. I love working with people who get excited about new things, about adopting new things, about discovering new things. So really love being helped by you and helping you. So if you just wanted to tell me that you're excited, just please let me know. And just wanted to pass along a huge thank you to my team here. This was pre-COVID times when we could still get together. This is some of my crew here and here as well. And there've been some new additions to the team, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to get together. My two PhD supervisors who've helped me to persevere and to think critically. My little senior dog here who's sat with me through 2 degrees patiently and probably knows more about dysphagia than most people because he's heard me practice all these talks so many years. And Jana Rieger, who's been my supervisor and mentor through many, many years and has let me, she's a fellow nerd and has let me stick a lot of EMG things on her face, everything from K-Pentax stickers to back when we were looking at epidermal electronics, and even tattoo electronics. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Gabi, thank you so much for your presentation. That was fantastic. Do you have time for a few questions?
I do, yes.
Excellent. All right, so we have a few that have come in. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, please feel free to email us at info@NFOSD and we can forward those on and try to get you an answer. The first question here, it's more of a clarification, asking about the signal. Is that a representation of muscle movement, but not necessarily a swallow? Is that true?
It is a representation of muscle contraction, yes. So the energy that comes from muscle contraction and based on the instructions that we give to patients, we imagine that it comes from a swallow, yes. So if I ask someone to swallow and then see that a swallow happened and that there's SEMG signal deflection, then I can presume that that signal came from a swallow or some mental muscle contraction associated with the swallow.
Okay. The next question here is about calibration. Is there a particular formula that you use to calibrate?
There's a few out there. I mean, ultimately what you'd like to do is average the signal on those 5 swallows that you end up doing. And then, like I said, let's say that average is 100. Base everything else that you do in that session as a percentage of that 100. So if you wanted your patient to swallow at 80% of that 100, then you do that 80%, use that as a target. If you wanted them to swallow at 250, then that's what you would use. So to answer your question, simply you get to pick the percentage, and the percentage is based on the average of the swallows that you collected during calibration.
This next question here is about research, and they're wondering, are there better or different results from treatment if you've used biofeedback assisted devices based on the patient's condition? So I think, for example, if somebody had a stroke versus a degenerative disease, using biofeedback, which type of patient population would make the best improvement?
That's a good question, and I think our field is still quite young to say definitively that this one patient population does better than this other patient population. Right now, I would say that I wouldn't venture even a guess, because I've been proven wrong even when I thought I knew the answer. So I would say that if you feel like you can use biofeedback, then go ahead and use it. What I found is that if patients are well, first of all, if they want to use it, if they like it, then go ahead and use it. If they understand what it means and they understand that they need to contract their muscles more or engage more to get a higher peak, then obviously they understand the essence of what the biofeedback's getting at. So then they would make good candidates for that. There are specific patient groups that I haven't worked with, but that I've heard respond really well to biofeedback, and that is the Parkinson's group. And of course, head and neck cancer patients respond to biofeedback really well, and we've used it with our patients successfully.
And then how are you measuring treatment outcomes for these patients that are using biofeedback?
What a great question. I laugh because our field has so many outcome measures out there, everything from patient-reported outcomes to clinician subjective outcomes to clinician objective outcomes, and a mix of these. What I like to do is to combine the three so that I get a bit of a patient perspective as well as my own clinical judgment. Right now, I'm at a place where I'm trying to understand what is important to clinician and what is important to patients. That is an outcome. Of course, most people like to gravitate to the modified barium swallow. That's the gold standard. But I would ask you, what from the modified barium swallow is important to you? Is it the penetration aspiration scale? Is it the MBS-IMP? There's so many things out there and everyone uses them differently. From the patient-reported side, with my patients, of course, because I work with head and neck cancer patients, I use the MD Anderson Dysphagia Inventory, and that has been tested, tried and true. It's simple to administer. There's some work out there from Kate Hutchinson showing how many points difference is a clinically important difference. So there's a lot of work done on the MD Anderson Dysphagia Inventory, a tool. And if there are other similar tools out there for your clinical population, I would use those. What I find with those is that I'm getting things that I'm not quite sure yet how to get at clinically. So for instance, I have patients telling me that it takes them less time to eat a meal. Now I know that we can measure this with timing and durations within the modified barium swallow, but I still think that we're not quite there at fully getting at what these patients are telling us is improving for them. I also have patients telling me that they feel more confident swallowing. So that's really interesting as well. That whole, I guess, gets at self-efficacy and feeling encouraged again to get on board with swallowing exercises. So to answer I know I've kind of gone every direction here. To answer your question in short, I like to use patient-reported outcomes as well as a little bit of clinical objective outcomes as much as I can. The two don't always correlate.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions here, if that's okay with you. The next one here, it says, what exercises or maneuvers do you find the submental placement works best to detect? Are some maneuvers less appropriate for SEMG than others?
That's a good question. I've used SEMG definitely with the effortful swallow because you can get patients to try and achieve a higher peak than they did before. Definitely with the Mendelssohn maneuver swallow, because that one is a really tricky one to teach. Some clinicians I've talked to in the past couple of weeks have shared the same thing. Even in our group, when we were starting to collect data, we were having difficulty teaching some of our team members to do the Mendelssohn maneuver swallow to collect data. So that one's a tricky one, but if you can show the tracing of what you're expecting to see, then it's easier to get the point across of what you're doing and what you're wanting the patient to do. And you can set time targets. So with a K-Pentax, I used to say, okay, try to reach my cursor with your swallow, with your line, or try to keep your biofeedback line above this dotted line, so the target, for 2 seconds. And then you can coach them while they're doing it. You can use your energy to make their energy more vibrant, right? Like your trainer does. So I'd sit there and I'd go like, go, 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 up, 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 stay, 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 hold, 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 to get them to have that sustained contraction above the target line that I was aiming for. I have tried it with the Masako. So essentially what you see is something akin to the effortful. So you see a peak go up and down, and based, so that one's a little more interesting because based on how far you're protruding the tongue, you're getting different signals. So I think you as a clinician can just watch out and see where you want to set the targets for that one. And I think those are the 3 that I've tried it with. You can do some tongue pushes on the roof of your mouth, but there are other devices for that as well. So I typically use it for effortful Mendelssohn, and I have used it for the Masako.
Excellent. I'm going to try to combine about 10 questions here into one. There's a lot of clinicians asking, they're interested in incorporating SEMG into their clinical practice. They don't have anything right now. How would they get started with that? What would you recommend? And budget-wise, what would they be looking at?
Okay, so excellent. I just want you to, I don't want to like advertise on this, but please get in touch with us at our website. So trueanglemedical.com, it's on here, or email us at info@trueanglemedical.com. And I'm happy to have a conversation with each and every one of you about that, because that's essentially what we've done with Mobili is make it accessible from a patient perspective and a cost perspective for you to have that in clinic. And right now we are looking for partners, clinician partners out there who would get a free Mobili from us, and we're looking to partner and learn from you what we can do better to make this a win-win for both you and your patients.
Excellent. Gabi, thank you so much. I will put your contact information, your email and your website in an email that will be sent to all the participants. We'll also send out a webinar survey just to get some feedback as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn this back over to Ed just for a few minutes to wrap things up here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gabi, I have 2 questions. One of the earlier questions that Elizabeth asked, this builds on it. So when I think of a swallow, I think of it in 3 phases: the oral, the pharyngeal, and the esophageal. So a deficit in which phase or phases would you expect to see the most benefit in the use of SEMG?
That's a great question, Ed. Thank you. Well, the thing about those phases is that they're interdependent. So if you see a deficit in one, it's likely going to impact what the other two are doing and vice versa. However, because I typically use SEMG with the effortful and the Mendelssohn swallows, those are two exercises that we typically use to strengthen more of the oropharyngeal aspects of the swallow. So a direct answer to your question would be the pharyngeal part of the swallow. But like I said, I would venture to say that even oral aspects of the swallow could be improved with things like the effortful, with the exercises like the effortful swallow for sure. And then that would have downstream effects and vice versa, as you know.
Okay, thank you for that. And I love what you're doing with the calibration to normalize results between sessions with a patient. Have you considered or tried marking spots on patients to help ensure consistent sensor electrode placement?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I can tell you have a designer mindset. Yeah, so without getting too much into the mobility world, because I don't want to talk about that too much because this is a public space, but we put markers on the mobility to help patients place this correctly. So for instance, in our first prototype, we call it the smiling cyclops. So we had, I don't know if the slides are still up, but we had a little eye and the smile, and the little eye was meant to go in line with the reference sensor, and the smile was where the two active sensors were. So we used that to guide patients in where to place it. Now with the new prototype that we have, we use lights to guide patients how to place it. So there's a light that should go out this way and that type of thing. So for sure, because it's so important.
Nice.
And that's all the designers, not me.
Well, your team has put a great deal of thought into this.
They have. Thank you.
Yes. With that, I just want to thank you for volunteering your time tonight. And I'm going to go through a minute of closing remarks.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. So thank you everyone for attending our dysphagia webinar series. If you had questions that were not answered, please email us at info@nfosd.com, or Gabi provided her email. You can email her directly. We did have a second poll question. And Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind putting the results up from that. So the question was, has the global impacted either my patient's treatment or as a patient, my personal treatment? 88% of people either strongly or somewhat agreed with that. So I think it's important to just do what we can as patients, and healthcare workers do what they can on their side to get the patient the treatment that's best for them in a safe manner. And with that, again, I want to thank everyone. Hope you have a a great evening or a great day, depending on what part of the world you're in. And I look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar. Goodbye, everyone.